Hi, I'm Christine Milne. I'm a board member at the Bob Brown Foundation, and I am very concerned, as indeed we all are, about the ridiculous waste of money that is about to be expended on building Project Marinus and Battery of the Nation in Tasmania. The whole argument is about whether the mainland needs that renewable energy from Tasmania to be able to transition to 100% renewables, because of course we all support getting off coal and gas as fast as possible. But what we don't support is just building infrastructure for the sake of it, especially when it's destroying biodiversity. And that's the case in Tasmania, where the whole of the north will be industrialised if this proceeds. So last year, we commissioned Dr. Bruce Mountain at the Victorian Energy Policy Centre to write a report to answer the questions: do we need Marinus Link and Battery of the Nation to get to 100% renewable energy? Will it bring down emissions, and is it economically viable? The answer to all three was no, and we decided to ask Dr. Mountain to update that, because so much has been happening in the energy revolution in the last 12 months. It's just extraordinary to see how amazing batteries, how fast they're coming down the cost curve, how technology is changing things. And so I'm joined today by Dr. Bruce Mountain, and I'm going to ask Bruce to start off by telling us, having looked at his report last year and what he has looked at in the last 12 months, what's his conclusion 12 months on? Is it any different? Has it reinforced the conclusions you found then?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have been involved in this work. It's very relevant and very interesting. So what we found in our study last year is building chemical batteries on the mainland, probably close to Melbourne at a number of locations, could provide up to 8-hour storage more cheaply at lower cost of operation plus ownership than building the Marinus Link alone. So even before you had set aside expenditure to radically alter the energy capability of the Tasmanian power system, building the batteries would give you the service of the cable plus the investment needed in Tasmania. And what we concluded then was it would be a slam dunk not to build a cable, but rather to be building batteries. Shortly after we completed our report, the Victorian government tendered for 300 megawatts of battery, which is operational now. And they and the Australian Energy Group, which ran the tender, found these batteries were a good deal cheaper to build than they had imagined. Since that time, there's around another 500 megawatts of batteries at various stages of being finalized, and 5,000 megawatts of battery that's been identified in a range of projects, a large portion of which is likely to be built. And looking at the official forecasts of battery costs, they're even more favorable now than they were when we first did our study. So whereas batteries cleaned up last year, when we looked, the trend now, the gap is now even larger. So the case for chemical batteries is even stronger. We've also seen in the Snowy Hydro project and the HumeLink transmission links necessary to bring its product to market, just how much more expensive these pumped hydro projects and transmission linkages are when they actually built. That has not been factored into the equation. But it gives us ever more reason to believe that it's just too late. It was a solution when batteries didn't exist, but it's not one now.
So what you're saying is really the proposal that Tasmania is making for Marinus and Battery of the Nation is obsolete where we're at in terms of the energy revolution in Australia. They've been leapfrogged. And now they're trying to retrofit a rationale at a huge expense. We're talking $7 billion for both of them and going up for something that's not needed.
Yeah, it really puzzled me when they put it on the table in the first place, because there was good reason to believe that batteries were going to be cheaper. They hadn't yet been rolled out in the enormous scale that they are now being, but there was jolly good reason to believe it was problematic. And there was reason to be doubtful that the claim of long duration storage, that there was actually a need for it. Now that we've seen those batteries rolled out, the case just gets weaker all the time. It puzzles me as to why they are persisting. There's many very useful energy challenges to be had, but there's no upside in Tasmania for this. So I carry on.
It's interesting because the Premier admits that there's not much in it for Tasmania. And in fact, the Treasury Secretary, when asked recently, had they modelled the income to Tasmanian government coffers or to Tasmanian government businesses from Marinus Link, they hadn't even modelled it. They all acknowledge this is not about Tasmania. So it is the short-term sugar hit of construction jobs in the context of the election. It's not long-term. And of course, we've seen that in Tasmania with Basslink already. All the same arguments being used now for Marinus Link were the same as when they proposed Basslink, and that has been nothing but a disaster and still is carrying more than $600 million worth of debt and is in voluntary administration as we speak. But Bruce, I want to come back. When we released your report last year, Tas Networks came back and said, oh, no, the Victorian Energy Policy Centre got it wrong if you look at what the CSIRO said, or if you look at what's happening in California. I wonder if you might just respond quickly to how, in fact, it's Tas Networks who didn't understand what CSIRO had said, or indeed what's happening in California.
Yes, so on CSIRO, they took a chart in a report that CSIRO publishes on the generation costs, where they express the storage cost of different technologies as a function of its capital cost. And so storage, total storage volume divided by the cost of actually building that storage is cheapest for long duration storage and for various types of, not all types of pumped hydro, but some. But that means nothing. It's looking at one element of the economics of storage. And when we express that storage capital cost per unit of power, the economics looks totally opposite. It's much cheaper to be building short duration storage, but that too means nothing. So there is no information value just at looking at one element of the economics of storage. That's the first comment. I don't know why they even pointed to that particular bit of CSIRO. Any energy economist would know that it has no informational value if you take it in isolation of the other bits of the economics. They also pointed to a study in the west coast of the US that was assessing the demand for long duration energy storage, but nothing in that report made a claim about the demand of greater than 8-hour storage or said anything about pumped hydro. So there is nothing in that report that can be taken as a demonstration or an argument for the support of pumped hydro or large scale storage in Tassie and the building of a massive cable. I can set that report, which doesn't make the claim anyway, against a number of government studies, both by the state commissions as well as by the federal government in the US, which has projected storage demands of different technologies out to 2050 under different scenarios, almost all of which are getting rid of a fossil fuel energy source in their power system very quickly, much more quickly than we intend to in Australia. And none of those studies foresee any role whatsoever for pumped hydro. They envisage the entire storage supply coming from chemical batteries of different times that they can store, and not a big demand for long duration energy storage, which is not a surprise to us. We simulated this using the energy market operators' data traces and using their own data traces for the step change, for the fast change, for the central scenario. We just do not envisage a large demand for long duration ways of actually storing energy, whether it's chemical or hydro. And the same conclusion now we see elsewhere too.
So Bruce, just yesterday, Premier Gutwin came out and said that independent analysis has confirmed that Project Marinus is economically viable and will place downward pressure on power prices. Of course, nobody has seen this independent analysis because I don't believe it exists. The whole logic for introducing the 200% renewable energy target legislation into the Tasmanian Parliament was in order to meet one of the conditions that was put on Tasmania by the energy market operator when they put Project Marinus into the 2020 integrated system plan. It made two conditions. One was that Tasmania legislated for it, and secondly, it was that a cost-sharing agreement be arrived at. Well, we legislated for it, but it is on that basis that the Tasmanian government says that this project is viable, simply because it is in the integrated system plan. But my understanding is that it's in the integrated system plan solely on the belief that Tasmania has 1,500 megawatts of energy, which is virtually free to the national electricity market. Now, that doesn't account for all of the costs of getting it there, all of the costs of in the Tasmanian environment, especially the loss of forests, the loss of Robbins Island, the impact on species, let alone costs. So can you just explain how it is completely wrong for the government to claim that because it has been put into an integrated system plan, it means it's economically viable?
Yes. Okay, so let's clarify. The link as it stands is not an actionable ISP project, which means that it is implicitly supported as something which should be built and built quickly. It does not have that current status. And then the issue is what economic analysis would need to be done to ascertain whether it should be actionable, whether it is in the public interest. And that economic analysis, like the regulatory investment test, considers a Marinus link plus the generation needed to make it useful. The link of itself does nothing to improve storage. It's by building generation and storage in Tassie that it's then useful. It takes all of that cost and it looks at alternatives to that, which would be building storage on the mainland and wind and solar on the mainland. That calculation is not done by the energy market operator. That's a regulatory calculation. So EMO never does that, and EMO can never claim, and indeed never does claim, that one transmission investment is economically beneficial or not. What EMO does do in some scenarios, but not all, is it makes assumptions on where generation and load is built and how that might change over time. And so, for example, for the Snowy Hydro, it assumed Snowy Hydro 2.0 was built, and then it said, what if we built a transmission line that makes it useful? Is it going to be used? Answer, yes, because it's built. But that says nothing about the economic case of the line. And the Marinus link is in exactly the same position. Should Tasmania, who knows what that means, Hydro Tasmania and or other producers, build a great deal of new generation capability and storage capability in Tassie, and that magically appears, would Marinus link be used? Answer, probably. To be honest, I think it's increasingly doubtful that it'll be used at all, because more flexible and quicker storage alternatives will be built up much closer to the load anyway. But even if you left that to one side, if you just assume a whole lot of generation is built in Tasmania, and therefore the line is used, that tells you nothing about the economic value of that line. So it's not plausible for TAS networks, for the state government, for others, to point to any claim or any inclusion of Marinus link in the ISP as a statement of the economic value of that link.